Today, we're going to load some filament. Yes, we are going to load some filament, but it might not be as easy as you think. I've had a lot of questions on the best way to load your geared type extruder, like a Bondtech for instance. The gears on a Bondtech are way too tight. There's no way you can just open a door, slide some filament in, and be good to go. You have to have some sort of loading sequence. And that's just because of the way the Bondtech is designed. The filament is fed in between two gears, and those gears are driven by a larger gear for a 3-to-1 ratio, and there's no way that you'll be able to push filament past this and get them to turn to load your hot end. Given that's the case, you have to get just a little bit creative. And honestly, I had to think on this one just a little bit. I load filament on Bondtech type extruders a couple of different ways. One, I'll load up some buttons in Octoprint that load and unload the filament with some Gcode. That works pretty well. And then there's things like the Prusa Mark III that have an auto-load sequence either using the filament sensor or the LCD panel. And in the newer versions of Marlin, there's an M701 and an M702 that you can use to load and unload filament. But then I got to thinking, what if you don't have the newest version of Marlin? And what if you're not using Octoprint? What if you have something like the Ender 3 that has stock firmware? And really, I was thinking about it, and I was kind of stumped. So I decided to Google it. And I should have done that in the first place. And what's one of the very first things that I find? It's the Bondtech site where they show you how to write scripts to load and unload filament. Then you can load it to your SD card and run them when you need to. Yep, why do I have to make things so hard? So really, I should have thought of this. You can just bake up some Gcode scripts that load and unload. They do a couple of different things. You can get creative as you want to here on any type of printer. So that's what we're going to walk through today. I'm going to show you the scripts that I'm going to use. They're a little different than the Bondtech scripts, but they still achieve the same results. So let me show you how I did it. So the only information we really need from the printer is the distance between the tip of the hot end and the end of the Bowden tube to the other side of the extruder. And this measurement doesn't have to be super accurate, but I'm just going to take some filament and roughly go down the length of the Bowden tube and loop it over to the extruder, and then I'm going to mark it at about that length. Right about there looks good. And I've got roughly 550 millimeters in my filament path. We will adjust that up a little bit for the unload, but again, you just have to be close. We'll jump back to the computer, so let's see what the Gcode scripts I came up with look like. Let's start with the unload filament Gcode. First line, a G21, you just want to make sure that you're using metric values for your extruder and your steps. Most of the time that's the default on firmware nowadays, but it never hurts to run it. Then we go to G90, we want to set to absolute positioning instead of relative positioning. When we move the extruder, we want to make sure that we're moving it just a set amount of steps and not to a location. And then along the way, we'll use the G92 command to get back to 0 to make sure that that doesn't happen. Then we're going to use the M92 command to set our E-steps. Now on some printers that you can control your firmware, you can set your E-steps hard-coded so you don't have to do this. But on a printer like the Ender 3 that has firmware already on it, that you can't save the EEPROM, you have to load this on all your Gcode and in these unload and load scripts so it uses the correct amount of steps per millimeter of filament for the Bondtech extruder. So mine is M92 E415. Then we're going to use the M109 command to set the hot end up to the temperature for the filament that we're going to use. I'm using PLA, so I'm going to use S210 to get it up to 210C. You can make a couple of these files if you like, one for PLA, ABS, PETG, whatever temperature you need, but 210 for PLA should work just fine. Then we're going to use that G92 command to set the extruder to position 0, E0. We're just resetting the counter to make sure that we're going from 0 to the amount of steps that we're going to need to move. And then on the unload, we want to make sure that we extrude a little bit before we pull the filament out. This just keeps it from jamming along the way. It makes the tip of the filament a lot nicer to be able to eject. So we're going to do a G1 E10 to extrude 10 millimeters of filament at a feed rate of 100, really slowly. Then again, we're going to use that G92 command to set back to 0, so E0. Then we're going to do the unload move with a G1 E-700, feed rate 2000. Now I said before that my filament path was around 550. It's actually just a little bit smaller than that. But when you're doing your unload, you want to make 100% sure that you've backed that filament out all the way and it doesn't get stuck someplace. So it's okay to have extra unload steps even if the filament's already unloaded. just to be safe and make sure that it's all the way out. Again, we'll G92E0 to get back to 0 position, just to be sure. We're going to wait and make sure all those commands have finished running before we move on to the next one with an M400 command. We're going to use M117 that displays a message to tell us to remove the filament now, which it should already be out of the extruder by now. And then an M400 at the end of the file, just for good practice to make sure everything in the file has been run and nothing will run after it. So that's good for the unload. Now let's move to the load. Again, we'll run that G21 to make sure we're in metric. We'll run G90 to make sure we're in absolute rather than relative positioning. Again, that M92E14 to set our E steps correctly if we can't save it in EEPROM or in the firmware. We'll do the M109 to heat up to 210 degrees before we do any action. Then we're going to do 3 M300 commands. The M300 will play a sound. The S value is the sound duration in milliseconds, and the P value is its frequency. So we're going to do 3 tones up the scale, low, medium, high. After the tone's played, I'm going to wait for 5 seconds with a G4S5. This gives me 5 seconds to be ready with the filament before it starts the load procedure. So it's going to play the tone, wait 5 seconds, and then the loading is going to start. Before the load starts, we're going to do the G92E0 to get back to position 0. And with the load filament, we're going to do a fast move to load the filament most of the way, and then a slow move when it gets down to the hot end so that it starts extruding the filament. So the fast move is a G1E400 with a feed rate of 2000. That will get it almost all the way to the hot end. Again, we'll G92E0 to get back to 0 position. And then we'll do the slow move, G1E100 with a feed rate of 200. The reason why you want to do the slow move is because you don't want to try to extrude too fast. When it starts down to the hot end and it starts extruding filament, there's a lot of force there on that Bowden tube, and it might kick it out at the extruder, and you don't want that. So go slow when you're actually extruding the filament. Again, G92E0 to get back to the 0 position, and then we'll M400 to finish the moves and make sure everything's complete. So now that we have our scripts done, let's go ahead and load them on our SD card. Now you could just drop those scripts in your main folder if you'd like, but most firmwares allow you to print from a folder. Marlin does as well. So I'm going to create a filament tools folder to put these in case I have more later that I want to add for different filaments. So I'm going to right click, new folder. There's my filament tools folder, and we'll just drop our 2 script files in there. We'll copy, and we'll paste them. Now we can load up our SD card and give these a try. You'll have to excuse my Ender 3 screen, it's a little wonky nowadays, but it should get us through this tutorial. So let's go in. We just loaded the SD card without powering the machine off, so we'll have to change SD card. And then we'll print from SD, and we'll go to Filament Tools. And since there's no filament in this machine right now, we'll go ahead and hit Load Filament. Now it's going to heat the hot end up to our 210 degrees. After that, it's going to play some tones so that we're ready to load that filament. It's almost at 210. It's playing our song. It's going to give us 5 seconds to get the filament ready. And then it starts the fast load. With the settings I have, it's going to get the filament right down to about there. And then it should start the slow load movement. We're on the slow load. And that's just enough to get the hot end primed and it starts kicking out filament. So that's a pretty good measurement. Maybe just a little bit more on the slow move, but not too bad. So let's go ahead and try our unload. We'll go back in, go to print from SD, the filament tools folder, and we'll hit unload filament. It's already up to temp, so it's not going to have to wait for that 210. It should start. It's going to kick out just a little bit of filament, and then it's going to start backing it out at a feed rate of 2000 really quickly. We're backing out. The filament is all the way out. It continues to run just to be safe, and the unload's complete. And there you go. That's the easiest way I can find to load and unload filament on a Bondtech extruder. I wish I would have found that article about a month ago before I started racking my brain on the easiest way to do this, but that's how it goes sometimes. You just need a little bit of help to get you started. Now this is going to work on a lot of different machines, but you're going to have to adjust your filament path length in both those scripts. Those scripts will be in the description below. I hope you found this helpful. If you did, please consider giving it a thumbs up or subscribing to my channel. If not, leave your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.